Okay, Jeetu, super excited about you having you on Wine in the Valley. I remember going for a hike with you during the pandemic, and I came back and I told my wife Priyanka that you have to meet Jeetu. His story is like a Bollywood story, of how you left India, how you came to US, how you were brought up early on and literally like how you got into tech. So I want to start right there.
You want to start right there. Actually, by the way, our hike is long overdue, so we should try to do another one of those.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Hey, firstly, thank you for having me on your show, and I think I'm a big fan of you and the work that you folks do, and we've been customers of yours at many companies that I've been at, and I think you've never disappointed me. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So just by way of background, I grew up in India. How much do you want me to go into detail, Ashish? Like, what do you want me to?
I particularly want to know more about like, your early period and your transition to US and, the challenges you faced early on, right?
Oh, right, right. So basically, my I grew up in India, in Bombay, and when I was about, so my dad was a high stakes con man. He used to be like Bernie Madoff. So he used to, swindle people for money. That was what he did for a living. Highly stressful living in that environment. So I wanted to get out of there. And so I decided, and then he was very abusive to my mom. So I, you know, put her in an undisclosed location and came to America. And, young and dumb. And I think there's a benefit to being young and dumb because you just go out and make those decisions without a whole lot of analysis. And sometimes jumping into it is way better than going out and overthinking things. And so it worked out pretty well. And you you kind of the story comes together actually 23, 24 years later. So I came over here, I started waiting on tables. I had an uncle over here whose place I stayed in for a while. There were people along the way. There were angels that helped me out while I was in my junior year in college. I joined the company as an intern. As soon as I graduated, I borrowed some money and a couple of us did a leveraged buyout of the original company. So we bought the company. I ran it for 17 years. And then I moved to the Valley. That's the abridged version. But the beauty of it was this. So in 2019, so my dad passed away in like 2004. I had gone back to, see him once before he passed away and then went to cremate him. But that was for 24 hours each. So I literally had not gone back to India since 1991, right?
Wow.
And so it was a long time since 1991 until I think it was 2017 is the first time I went back to India. And 2017, when I went to India, reason I went there is I had a daughter. I'm like, she's getting old now. Let's make sure that we kind of show her roots. And so we went to India. And so we took her to the Taj Mahal. And, I had gone there when I was a kid, her age, like, 8, 9 years old, something like that. And so I'm like, I got to go back and take her there. And so we took her there and we had this tour guide, Ashish, and his name was Raj.
Hmm.
And I don't even know if you know the story. So he actually was walking us around the Taj Mahal. And the guy was a great product guy. He knew his product inside and out. And his product was going out and getting people excited about the experience, right?
Yeah.
He knew his product really well. And I don't know how much of this shit he kept making up or if it was actually true, but boy, it sounded good. And he, every time someone walked by, he'd bust out in a different language. He'd speak to Mandarin in someone, he'd speak to German, speak to someone in French, speak to someone in English. So at some point, like there was enough of these people that would walk by where I stopped. I'm like, dude, how many languages do you speak? It's like, I speak 9. I think it was like 7 or 9 or something ridiculously large. But he said, I learn a new language every year. I'm like, oh, okay. Why do you learn a new language every year? Well, my business is tourism. And I meet people from everywhere. So I want to honor them and I want to make sure that I speak to them in their language. And he was just like this master salesman, this master experience curator. And I came back and, I used to work at Box at the time. And I was thinking to myself, I'm like, this guy is smarter than any of the sales reps that we have in any of the companies I've worked at. He's smarter, definitely twice as smart as any of the executive teams I've been a part of.
Understanding his customers, right? Like, yeah.
But the difference, he made like $12 a day or something, and we all make a stupid amount of money over here that none of us deserve. Like it's an enormous amount of wealth that gets created, right? So what was the big delta? And the delta was I had a platform and he didn't. That was the only difference. I had a platform of America. I had a platform of tech. I had a platform of education, and this guy didn't have that. And therefore, he might never be able to break out of the $12 a day life cycle, whereas I was lucky enough to. And it had nothing to do with intellect. It had nothing to do with potential. And if you have a platform and you don't take advantage of it, that's when it makes you think like it's criminal. You got to take advantage of it.
Yeah.
And so it all came together for me at the end where, I was lucky enough that my dad was abusive and all of that, that it motivated me to do things. But boy, I didn't realize it until 2019 on how fortunate I was that we were able to do things in a way that, or 2017, where we were able to do things in a way because we had the platform. And since then, like this has been something I tell everyone, like if you have a platform, don't squander it. And you've done a great job not squandering it.
I remember, Jeetu, that like in high school, I read somewhere that if you become a computer engineer in US, your starting salary is like $55,000. And like growing up, I was like, if you make $55,000 a year, you can retire, right? Like, back in 80s and 90s, like living in India was pretty cheap. And my biggest reason of coming to US was how can I be independent?
Yeah.
And that was and education was that platform, as you said, right? And I know, Jeetu, that over the years, you've gotten very close to your mom, and unfortunately you lost your mom recently. I would love to know, like, despite all of us become very busy with, our own family and friends and work, how do you build such a close relationship, with your mom or dad or parents?
I didn't have one with my dad, so I don't know if I have the formula down for both. But it was easy with my mom because she was the best mom on the planet, and she just recently passed away. It'll be 3 months on the 7th, and she was my rock. She was my best friend. You're gonna be like Oprah. You're gonna make your guests cry on fucking stage. It's great. But no, it's she was my best friend, and she there's very few people in life that parents are very special in the way that's very unconditional from parents to children. Although I think it's more unconditional from mother to child than it is from father to child. Like I see what Jyoti does with our daughter and I see what I do with our daughter. They're very different things. Like she loves our daughter more than she loves herself in a way that's very, very visible, and it's so amazing to watch it. I think mothers are special. And with my mom specifically, she took that to the next level, which was she was never at all confused that she had one and only one priority, and it was me and no one else. I was the only child. And no matter what I did, I couldn't do any wrong. But she was also towards the end. So here was the thing that was amazing. And we might not ever get to your product topics over here, but this is something that you started off. So I'll actually give you this. So towards the end, we knew that she was going to go. And she had said to me, she's like, Jeetu, I'm ready. I'm ready, but I'm worried about you and how you're going to do. And so we sat for about 3 days while she was in the ICU, or not in the ICU, in the hospital. with all the things hooked up to her, so that she could start getting me conditioned for being okay when she was gone. And she changed roles. When we were young, she was the mother, I was the child. Then for the most part of my life, in my adult life, she became the child, I was the parent. And then towards the last 2 weeks, she became the parent again and was brutal to me on some things. Like, you're losing your way on these three things. You got to make sure you get your act together here. You're doing really well over here. You got to be proud of this rather than beating yourself down. Unbelievable. And so when you have a mother like that, it's hard to not be a good son. But I'll give you this advice, and you told me this yesterday that you see you talk to your mom frequently and all of that as well. My biggest realization that I had was the gift I was given was the last 8 weeks when she was walking 4 miles a day, and then last 8 weeks she just went sideways. I was there with her the whole time, and the last 2 weeks we knew that she was going to be gone, and I barely took bathroom breaks because I didn't know if she'd be gone by the time I got up to go. So like it was like I was right there with her. My advice to you is, as much as you can, and when you think you're doing too much, you're probably just getting warmed up. Call your mama, come on, call your dad, tell them you love them, and don't do it over and over and over again, because I promise you, you'll never regret it. And it'll never feel right now like you're not going to be okay when they're gone. But man, you're going to miss them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. First, I would say thanks a lot, Jeetu, for sharing such personal moments. And I remember, from our hike, one key thing you shared, and I, still remember that, I think about it a lot, is that, sometimes like you're trying to help your parent and and they're feeling as if like we are doing a favor to them. And it's like, how do you position that act as if they are doing a favor to you, right? And that's how you actually upgrade their life and make them feel comfortable. And that was such a great insight. And I have been using that very effectively, right? I think one example you gave me was like, yeah, just imagine, for instance, you want to give them a better house, right? If you just give them a better house, they'll be like, what's wrong with my current house? No, I don't need it, right?
Yeah.
And the idea you flipped on me was, if you tell them, hey, I just want to invest in this property and I want you to take care of it, that was brilliant.
They feel a sense of purpose in the later years. By the way, the other thing is you have to maintain their dignity. You have to be worried about maintaining their dignity. And the thing you have to be worried about most is that you do not become the source of the erosion of their dignity.
Yeah.
But children sometimes can get to be, we all go through a stage of lack of confidence, arrogance, then realization that we're not as good as we think we are, and then a level of humility, hopefully during the later years of life. They are in the stage of humility. But when they're in the stage of humility, kids are in the stage of arrogance.
Yes.
And that's the time when you can actually erode their dignity quite a bit. So make sure that you be self-aware that you can't be in that state of arrogance with your parents, because you will erode their dignity, and it'll be bad for you because you will realize it at some point. They will be gone by then, and you will have such regret.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. So changing gears a little bit.
Yes.
I love what you put out on Twitter. I'm a big follower of yours on Twitter. How do you come up with, such content, and how do you maintain the frequency, of posting?
I'm not very good with regularity. I'm better at LinkedIn than Twitter because I tend to be not as brief. And I find like LinkedIn has a better mechanism to allow me to be a little bit more verbose than Twitter does. So I will take excerpts of LinkedIn and put it on Twitter from time to time, but LinkedIn's the way that you do it. But the reason I do that actually is I only started doing this like 5-6 years ago. Um, as you get older, I'm 52. I'll be 52 in June. As you get older, you start to find out that uh, there are things that you've learned, and that if you don't share them, people will have to go through the process again. And if you share them, and even if one human being gets slightly wiser as a result of learning that you had, you've actually done your part at giving back in some way. Because a lot of people gave me a lot of advice, some of which I took, some of which didn't resonate at the time because I had to experience it, and some of which I still don't resonate with because I still have to experience it because, life still has some years left. But I do feel like giving that back is an easy way to make sure that you can share what you're learning. And the frequency is like, I'm not very good with being like, I don't do, I have to do this twice a week. If an idea comes to me, I'll post it. And if an idea doesn't come, I won't post for weeks. Because what I try to be very careful of is no one in, like large corporations, they'll be like, well, let us have a comms person manage your account. No one manages my Twitter account. No one manages my LinkedIn account. They don't even ghostwrite things for me. I'm like, if it's going to be me, if I'm going to publish something, it's going to be in my voice. I will write it. And if not, then we won't do it. It's okay
Yeah.
if I don't do it. Like it's,
Yeah.
so that's, but I think it's been fantastic for actually me starting to realize I used to do it so that I would share with other people and they would benefit from it. What I started realizing was my self-awareness and learning got heightened when I wrote it down. And so it became a selfish motive for me to say, okay, if you write this down and keep it. And then there was a guy that came in that said, if I take all your posts and turn it into a book, would you mind? And so he's trying to do that right now, but I don't know if I'll ever get around to publishing something.
No, that is awesome. So Jeetu, I first time I met you was like around 2013, 14 timeframe when you were at EMC. And I would rate you as like one of the early pioneers of championing design, especially in enterprise apps, right?
Prize apps, I would be
Like,
the
yeah, it's like,
trying to do that back then.
what's that?
I said I'm still stupid enough to try to keep pushing this thing. Enterprises should have good experiences as well.
Absolutely, right? Like at the end of the day, enterprise users are also consumers first. So
Totally.
I totally agree with you. In fact, the whole principle of YML or the growth of YML is based on this,
Totally.
principle, right? To begin with, right? And I remember like we worked with you at EMC and, you know, every small detail, right? Like you sweat the detail and we would reiterate on it and like, how everything was expand, the interaction, all that stuff. And and if I fast forward today, right, like in the world of AI or Chat GPT, I feel like one of the biggest reason why OpenAI has become successful is not necessarily the technology, because I think Google and some of the other companies have the technology.
Yeah.
But what OpenAI did was a simple design interface
Yeah.
to expose the power to
Yeah.
a common person what AI means,
Yeah.
right? And if I look at like, Netflix took like 3 years to get to 1 million users, right? Instagram took 3 months. Chat GPT took like 3 days,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And so what do you look for in a product?
So, let me parse this question because it's a really interesting topic. And I recently had a keynote at RSA where we talked about like the experience, and I gave the same example. And my stat was, it took ChatGPT 60 days to get to 100 million users. It took Instagram 2.5 years and Facebook 4.5 years to get to 100 million users, which is very similar to what you said.
Yeah.
That it's there is a intrinsic demand and pull for something that's elegant and easy to understand that people will gravitate to, especially when it's 1000x better than the thing that's out there today. And I think they didn't meet the 10x rule. They actually did the 1000x rule, which was amazing. But what I think there's two aspects over here that are important. One is what do you look for in design? Two is what is design going to be like in the future?
Mm-hmm.
Equally important questions.
Yeah.
Second one probably even more important than the
Yeah.
first.
Yeah.
What do you look for in design, I think, is the way I think about this is when you take an action, the next thing that happens should not be something that's a surprise to you. It should be something that you as a human should just expect,
Hmm.
and you should expect it. But the fact that behaved the way that you expected it to should delight you because it did it in such an elegant and graceful way. Because in my mind, if you want to build products for hundreds of millions of people, billions of people, the only scalable marketing engine that you have is word of mouth. No amount of billboards on 101 will get you there. It is only word of mouth. And so if you say, I want to go out and do word of mouth, how do you get word of mouth? Word of mouth happens when you build something that people love that they talk to their friends and family about. And they become like, if you looked at the RSA conference for security that just happened recently, it was the biggest commercial opportunity for, what company? For ChatGPT. They weren't even in the event. Every company talked about them.
Yeah.
Word of mouth, right?
Yeah.
You and I are talking about them right now. That's
Yeah.
word of mouth. And so I think that's important. So what you look for is it something that's natural, and is it something that does not take a cognitive load, but it's something that gives you the richness of information in an easy enough way. And I think this concept of progressive reveal is really important, because if you just do things all at once, it's overwhelming. But if you do things little by little, people start to feel smart because they're absorbing things, processing, absorbing, getting the next thing, processing, absorbing, getting the next thing, so on and so forth. Where interfaces are going to go in the future is actually an even more interesting question. And I think they're going to go into this kind of complete, I think we are at the, fourth major revolution of interfaces. There was the text-based terminal. There was, which then evolved into a command line prompt for PCs, but it was all text-based, based on rules that were pre-written. You had to follow syntax. Then you got to a graphical user interface. Then you got to touch and mobile, which was big. And now I think you're going to get to a prompt-based interface. And it's going to be prompt-based, that's natural language. So you're kind of reverting back to text in some way, but slightly differently, in the sense that you won't need to learn how a product works over time, because there'll be an abstraction layer that says, just do this for me, and then it'll do it. And it'll show you the things it needs to show you, rather than you having to figure out, like, where do I dig in the menu to figure out how to go out and connect my camera? What do I do over here? What do I do there? Like, those things you don't have to worry about. You just say, well, connect my camera, do X, Y, Z, and then it just gets it done. And I think that that's going to be the next big kind of iteration, and it'll actually pull data from multiple sources. And you're starting to see this kind of occur, and it'll be conversational in nature. So it's not just a one-way direction. When it has a question, it'll ask you the question. So the computers become very, very natural in their interfaces. Experiences are going to evolve to being natural. And that, I think, is going to be, every time there's been a major shift from like character text-based terminals to GUI to touch, think about it as it added another billion users every time, right? I think you might see a step function improvement in this natural language interface where it might add the rest of humanity to it. Because as long as you can write, and as long as you can have something that you want to get done, that you ask it, it'll get it done. And it's not going to be where you have to remember instructions. You have to remember the problem that you had with even things like Alexa is you had to speak and remember the command so it could then tell you what to do. Whereas over here, you don't have to remember that. You just do whatever you feel, and it just tells you.
Even like one very, I would say, key example where AI is disrupting things immediately is like, you don't have to be a programmer to write code. It's like the use case right now, how an engineer can be like maybe 50% more efficient, right? Like, how do you not need the same level of team to do the exact same thing? Because now you don't need to go through a 4-year computer science degree to start programming, right? Like ChatGPT is your like assistant.
And it's I think that it's not just about writing code, it's about everything that you do. If you're there is a skills shortage, and also at the same time an employment shortage, which is very counterintuitive. There's more jobs that are open now than ever before, but there's also people that are unemployed. if you actually can use tech to make it easier so that anyone can do a job, but they can learn and they can get smarter and they can get better as a result of tech, boy, you could actually have a lot of good people being put to great use, and their lives get enriched as they're doing it. And there's this self-learning aspect that happens with the machine so that the machine teaches you and makes you better. One of the reasons I like going back to ChatGPT is I get smarter every time I go there because I ask it a question and it teaches me something I didn't know.
Yeah.
And that is motivation enough for a curious person to go back and say, oh, what am I going to ask it today? And it becomes muscle memory. So I think that the internet was that way for us. I think the mobile phone to some degree was that way as well. And so I do feel like there's a meaningful revolution that's going to happen, not just on AI becoming the new platform, but for AI driving a new set of ways that humans interact with computers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like AI is the perfect example of, you always overestimate what technology can do in a short run, but you always underestimate what tech can do in the long run. And I feel like that long run is coming to an end, like for AI, where you can actually see the impact happening, right? Like,
I mean, it's think about 1000x scientific progress
yeah,
as an exponent, and that on a continuous basis. Boy, that changes. The other thing that people actually are not fully consuming, we've been investing in AI for a long time. And natural language has really evolved. But one of the things that people did not consume, which was a genius of the large language models and all of that OpenAI brought to bear, was there is going to be more original insights from machines than there have been in the past.
yeah,
Ever. Machines were aggregators. They were not original insight generators. You're now generating original insight. Like maybe the question of how to cure cancer might not come from any human, but might come from a machine deducing how to go out and kind of cure cancer. So that in my mind is another super exciting thing for humanity. Now, by the way, just as much, there's enough downsides that we can't just be rose-colored glasses over here because it could create fair amount of displacement. I think it should be regulated. I think there has to be some level of policy. There has to be education for policymakers so that they know how to go out and keep up with the pace of innovation that's happening, so they know the policies to have. There's going to be huge issues around attribution. How do you go out and assign attribution for content creators, or so that they don't get completely marginalized? I think there'll be enough hard, complex issues. There'll be huge issues around, like, literally, what do you do? Is universal basic income something that will have to happen for humanity over time? Because a lot of jobs will have meaningful alteration. And as displacement happens, what do you do? And I think us as a tech community will have to really go out and pay careful attention and work with policymakers and make sure that rather than pointing the finger, all of us engage in saying, how does this need to all come together?
So do you believe like this is it's a good time to have a pause on, the development for AI because of its negative repercussion, or what's your point of view on that?
I don't think a pause is executable.
Mm.
What I do think needs to happen, I believe that AI should be regulated. I believe AI has massive amounts of downside, and I believe that there has to be a huge amount of sense of urgency on how the private sector and public sector work together in order to make sure that AI doesn't get. Look, part of my job is cybersecurity. Cybersecurity has two dimensions to AI, right? One of them is like, hey, you can use AI to make defenses better, but guess what? Those same technologies are
Yeah.
being used for AI for making the attacks more sophisticated,
Mhm.
and the adversaries have access to the same technology as the defenders do,
And
and
they are not pausing.
they're not pausing. So you pausing doesn't help.
Yeah.
It's like, and so I do feel like pausing might not. I'm not sure if pausing is the right solution, but I appreciate the intent of the open letter.
Yeah.
And the intent of the open letter is we have to be very intentional, and that this is not. Silicon Valley has had a mindset which is, look, innovation happens, it's going to have some collateral damage, you just have to suck it up and deal with it, and the survival of the fittest. I just don't think that that's, when a steel mill worker loses their job, it was far away from us that we didn't care about the disruption. And I think now what you're starting to see is creative workers will
Yeah,
also have a potential of having
absolutely.
in fact, more so than the steel.
Exactly. Yes.
And
Yes.
so I do feel like I'm glad that that's happening, because then the way that we can't approach this in a nonchalant manner. I think it could have substantial accretion to society, and it can have substantial dilution to society and societal existence. And we have to make sure that we are being very realistic on both fronts. And that'll require um, ethical conduct. That'll require responsible AI mechanisms in place. That'll require policy and regulation to be put in place. That's going to require education. I think all of these things will have to be kind of thought through.
So, what do you feel as like who's going to win, if any, like at the end, right? Like, I feel like every big tech company is coming up with their own LLMs. And it's so hard to differentiate, right? Like, clearly, ChatGPT or OpenAI is the one who has a pretty massive lead. However, I don't think from technology standpoint, others are that behind.
Yes, I think if you look at AI, I think of it in three ways. There's the experience, there's the model, there's the data, and then there's the experience. Uh, the model is the one that we've been talking most about, but actually in the long run is going to be the least differentiated component. In fact, what will happen is if you take three models even today and actually feed it the same data, you're not that far distant on the substance of the output. You might have one model that gives you a longer response, one model that gives you a shorter response, but over time, the substance of the insight is going to get normalized with the same set of data.
Mhm.
If any model has slightly more nuanced data and slightly better data or additional data, you will see a step function improvement in that model. So then you say, okay, so the data that you feed into the model and the specialization of the model itself for certain industries and certain domains will actually be the next step. And it's not going to be the generic foundational models that are going to be the main differentiator.
Yeah.
That will become converged over time, but it's the data and the specialization of the model that will be two things, and then the experience will be the third. Frankly, a lot of people knew about how LLMs work, and they might have been able to create very similar output to ChatGPT, but the reason they nailed it, like you said earlier, was the experience.
Yeah.
And so that experience will be pretty important as well. And the combination of these three, the specialization of the domain and the model and the data set and training and the human reinforcement processes you put in place for reinforcement learning and the experience pulled together is what's going to create more kind of magic. So when you start getting these many variables in, I don't think this is going to be a universally owned monopoly of 95, 98% market share for one vendor. I think you're going to see a fair amount. Now, by the way, that having said that, you know, the large companies are getting better and better and better at actually fending off disruption than what they used to in the past. And so I think you just have to make sure that that's being thought through. But this is going to be a tremendous opportunity for new startups to kind of emerge as you go forward.
How will AI influence enterprise apps and communication,
I
particularly?
think you will see a fair amount of domain-specific and tenant-specific insights. So if you think about enterprise right now, if you look at a general purpose model like ChatGPT and go to ChatGPT and say, hey, what meetings did I miss this morning? It's not going to give you a relevant answer. Well, is there an opportunity for a company like WebEx to say, not only what meetings did I miss this morning, what transpired in those meetings? Were there any action items for me? And when do I need to get this done by? And if I could have that because I missed the first 3 meetings in the morning, that gave me a summary, boy, that'd be pretty useful. But that could only happen because of a specialized model and custom data sets for that tenant that were actually used with an experience that was frictionless enough where they were able to just go out, put that in, and get a response back pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And so that would happen on productivity side. I mean, in the security side, you can, and one of the concepts that we showed at the RSA keynote was this fundamental concept of like, how does the security operations center, the SOC, and the SOC analyst, the security operations center analyst, who's looking at screens all day on all the breaches that are happening and what attacks are starting to happen, and is there exfiltration of data and so on and so forth? How can we automate that entire process and give that person an assistant of some sort? There's a bunch of those kind of, and those are all enterprise use cases. Those are not like consumer use cases, which I think are going to be meaningfully asymmetric compared to the way that we've been able to build software before, and step function improvements.
So when I look at WebEx today, right, in terms of competition, you have Teams, Zoom, WebEx, Google Hangout. So what is the strategy of like, how do you differentiate?
Yeah, so
Massive market, but it's also a crowded market.
yes, the way that we've actually differentiated, so I think there's a very different strategy against Microsoft versus someone against Zoom or Google. In some cases, we might operate in different segments. In some cases, we have a very different kind of level of asymmetry on the set of things people can do with our products, use cases wise, what use cases we serve. In some cases, we might actually coexist, right? And so, first thing, if you think about where the future is going, it's going with hybrid work. People are going to work in mixed mode. Some people will be in the office, some people at home, some people somewhere in the middle, and that's going to happen with most of the meetings. It's going to happen. And so what we wanted to do about 3 years ago when I joined, our strategy was, let's create a suite. That suite should include a basket of capabilities that allows people to connect and communicate more effectively in a secure manner. Calling, messaging, meetings, polling, Q&A, events, whiteboarding, async video, all of those things pulled together that work really well with our hardware as well as third-party hardware. So we have conference room equipment, we have home equipment, all of those pieces that works really well. And we will make sure that our software and hardware are fully integrated into the ecosystem. So we will integrate our hardware into Zoom and Google Hangouts, and most importantly into Microsoft, because they've got the most amount of momentum right now. And so we actually have fully integrated our hardware into them. And what I mean by that is their operating system runs on our hardware. We have a choice of having our operating system run on our hardware or their operating system run on our hardware. You can have their operating system run on our hardware, and most importantly, you can have WebEx launched from their operating system. That completely changes all the things about the experience, because what we've done is we've been investing in AI for about 5 to 7 years, made about $1.5 billion of investments over there. And so, for example, noise removal, noise cancellation, video intelligence, summarization, all of these kind of techniques that have been in place. We are taking a lot of that innovation and we're moving it to the hardware level. And when you do it at the hardware level, our devices will actually go out and work very well with Microsoft Teams. So Microsoft Teams will work better than what it was designed to work when it works with our devices. Because noise cancellation is world-class, and you actually get noise equalization, and you get removal of certain human voices and amplification of other human voices, and you get focusing that can be better. If you have 4 people in a conference room, you can actually show 4 individual boxes because we have video intelligence. We just launched this thing called cinematic meetings, where rather than going out and staring at someone in the same angle for 2 hours in a meeting, it'll feel like a movie, because every 3 to 5 seconds, the angle will change. And so it'll feel like very refreshed. And so your fatigue factor will go down. All of these things we've moved to the hardware level, And so that'll actually create a very, very good differentiated view. And then our software is a full platform. So when we go out and build something for meetings, that actually works really well on calling. But then we also have Slido, and so it works really well over there as well. And so then all of these different capabilities get added to it. And then lastly, we've also got that same platform on which we've built contact center. So now you're starting to get very, very specialized apps for certain personas that are being built. And when you start looking at that, some of our products in these lines I'm talking about are growing at very, very healthy rate as a result of that.
So I feel like in the next 1 or 2 years, right, there will be a massive consolidation in tech, right? The key reason is that how do you go up against big companies like Microsoft, Cisco? I feel like scale is a big moat, right? Even so, when I look at Slack, for instance, right, like they were acquired by Salesforce because I'm guessing they were probably having a hard time competing with Teams as a bundle software, all those things, right? So what do you suggest for, a founder of an enterprise app company, right? How do they build a moat?
So I think um, there is benefits of scale and there's benefits of absence of scale. And I don't think that changes. Like Jeff Bezos always says, right? Like when you start thinking about something, don't think about what's going to change. Think about what remains the same. What's going to remain the same is there's going to be new ideas that large companies will not um, find it interesting enough to execute in, but small companies might, and it'll be great. And there'll always be opportunity for that. And then there will be things which are inherently going to be advantageous where large companies have the size and scale to be able to do more effectively. So I think it's going to be a combination of both. And so I don't think that it's going to be harder in the next 5 years to build a startup than it was in the past. I think like the stupid money going into stupid ideas will stop right now because of the way that the market's moving to much more of a focus on like, let's make sure that we have growth, but at reasonable prices. And so GARP investment is better than like, just pure growth investment at any cost. I think that's actually a healthy construct. But think about this. Google was started during a recession. It did really well. Um, you know, you look at OpenAI, it actually didn't, it was launched on November 30th and people were very uncertain about the world. Hasn't stopped them from going out and going really, kind of growing really fast. And I'm sure that there's going to be new companies. So the thing I say is when you create a product that has intrinsic pull, those companies, those products will do well regardless of the economic conditions. When you create a product where you feel like your go-to-market's not doing a great job, chances your product doesn't have intrinsic pull. So if you're a startup and you can't sell it fast enough because you feel like you don't have the right sales team, it's never the sales team. That's the
Yeah.
problem.
So it's like with this current momentum on, focus on cost and making sure that companies are cash flowing and so on and so forth. How, how do you see that the culture in the valley is going to change, right? There was a time when Facebook and Google will have such perks that nobody else would be able to compete, and hence everyone had to offer that, and then that became the culture, right? Now it's kind of like we are in that unwind moment, and so where do you see like long term, the valley culture is going to end up? And then you have on one side the extreme culture of like what Elon Musk has shown, right? Like he's got, I think, more than 60% of the company and like, making fast progress and not making everything perfect, but, trying to move forward fast and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think like one of the things that culturally we have to keep in mind is I think there's a few things. Firstly, depending on the age bracket of the person that you're talking to, you might have very different perspectives. Um, some of us that are older have actually seen this a few times over. And you find that there's pattern in in economic cycles. You know, when things look really, really good that nothing can touch it is when they start going down. When things go down that you feel like nothing can stop it, they start going back up again. And so you can't get too phased about the fact that what I spend the least amount of my time doing is worrying about macroeconomic issues. Why? Because I don't think I can control them.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it is a very interesting concept to ponder what would happen geopolitically in certain things. But rather than that, I would rather spend my time pondering how can you go out and create intrinsic pull with your product in the market.
Mm.
Now, talking about the culture on the free food, anyone that makes their decision at any era based on the perks they have is probably an employee you don't want, right? You want an employee that's based on a mission that who has aligned their value system with yours, and a free sandwich shouldn't actually be the breaking barrier between them coming to your company versus not. So if you have that, then you're going to get the free sandwich kind of output,
Yeah.
and so you get you're going to get that kind of mentality and that kind of output, which is going to be you're going to be more in maintenance work of, am I managing you based on the perks I'm giving you? Am I managing you based on the mission I've given you? And I think like people have to have thick skin in business. If you don't have thick skin in business, it doesn't work. And so if you're bent out of shape because you don't have the right kind of candy or orange juice in the
Yeah.
fridge,
Yeah.
well, you're certainly not my kind of person to go out and hire. So that's one. Number two, though, is on the margin side. And how do you think about profitability? You can never sell a dollar bill for 90 cents and make it up in volume.
Mm.
It just doesn't work, you know? And so what do you do then? Well, you have to make sure that your unit economics work out well, that you know that eventually you can actually get to positive unit economics, even if you don't optimize for gross margin on day one. Because once you know the gap between what it takes you to produce a good and what it takes you to sell the good, the remainder of the investment is completely discretionary based on how much growth you want to modulate.
Mm.
Right? And so if I have a gross margin of 70%, that's 70 cents in the dollar that I can actually put towards sales and marketing, R&D cost, G&A, anything else, depreciation, facilities, all of those things, and say I need to have a certain thing on the back end. But if I only have 20 cents on the dollar that I have available, my flexibility is much less. So what you want to have right now is you want to start making sure as you're starting to think, you don't have to be in zero you know, in the dilutive phase. You don't have to be in the accretive phase on day one. You don't have to make large amounts of net profit on day one. What you have to know is how is that lever going to be exercisable if you needed to?
Mm.
And once you have that, then it's just a matter of a function of growth. Like I think it would be bonkers for OpenAI to say, I'm going to try to get profitable right now. It would make no sense.
Yeah.
Right? But OpenAI needs to think about, hey, what's my cost equation going to look like? And am I going to lose money where I can never make up the volume because I am going to be part of someone's gross margin line item?
Yeah.
And if I have my APIs too expensive, people won't use me. And if they don't use me, and if I can't go out and sell it to them for cheaper where I don't lose money on gross margin, I have to have some kind of light at the end of the tunnel on unit economics. If that doesn't work, then you built a crappy company. And that's what you have to kind of think through. And don't get too carried away by the wave of, oh, now it's the profit game. And these are not like new concepts.
Yeah.
Eventually, every company is built so that you can create op inc. But you know, the timing of the op inc should be created based on like how you think through unit economics.
And how do you envision, like, with so many companies forcing people to come back to work now, right?
Mm.
It's like during the pandemic, we were on one side, and now, you know, with layoffs, we are kind of hitting a big reset. So where do you see it's going to net out in the long run, right? Hybrid work, I feel, is going to stay. It's just the ratio, I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting, it's a slightly involved answer. So I'll give you like in a couple different parts. Firstly, I think the future is going to be hybrid because people will work in mixed mode. What I think the next generation of leaders have to keep in mind is a good next generation leader will know how to build strong, deep relationships and ties without actually meeting them in person.
Mm.
If you can do that, that doesn't mean that when you meet in person, you're not great. But if you don't meet in person, you can still go out and get high bandwidth exchanges of not just the tactical stuff, but also the strategic stuff and the relationships. And that, I think, is an art form because right now, most people use video as a means of transactive communication, not of relationship-based communication. So I'll give you an example. You and I talk on the phone on WebEx. We have a 30-minute agenda, and there's 7 people in a meeting. And at minute number 22, everyone stays quiet for about 30 seconds. I guarantee you someone comes up over there and says, okay, any other questions, or we can give you back 8 minutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now think about you and I going to dinner with those 7 people, and there's a 30 minutes lull. What do you say? You say, hey, Jeetu, what do you do for fun, man?
Yeah.
Should we go for a hike again? How's your daughter doing?
Yeah.
You know. And why is that? Because we have learned in-person dynamics to wander. And wandering creates familiarity, and familiarity creates trust, and trust allows you to have the ability to have conflict without having, without taking that conflict personally. And that debate is important as a condition, a necessary condition for going out. You know, conflict is a necessary condition of business. That's missing in video exchanges right now. And it's not because of an absence of video not allowing you to wander. It's because humans have been programmed to think that video is for productivity. I have a 30-minute meeting, I've got an agenda, I'm going to go through it. Then those leaders that actually figure out a way to crack the code on video have a workforce of the entire planet at their disposal. And so while people say, I want to come back, what I would say to them is, don't focus so much on mandating people back. And by all means, create a magnet. We talk about, rather than a mandate, create a magnet for people to come back some portion of the time. But don't fixate that much on that. Fixate on, how are you going to make sure that you can build relationships that are deep and meaningful, even when you've never met them? Because then it unlocks for you a potential that other people don't have. And that's an unfair advantage.
Yeah. That's a great point. Jeetu, I have like so many more questions. Unfortunately, we have come to the last segment, of our podcast. And I'm going to give you two options and you have to pick one.
Okay.
There are no right or wrong answers. Okay. I'll start with which tech has had a bigger impact, Google search or iPhone?
iPhone.
Experimentation or research?
Experimentation.
Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos?
I think Elon, for the consequence of his contribution to society. But yeah, Elon.
And great book or a great movie?
Great movie is the one I just recently saw. One of the best movies, Air.
Okay, well,
You gotta go see it. It's
I have to go this weekend.
Air is it was sensational. It was Michael Jordan's deal with Nike on the shoe and how it came about, and so well done, so well done. You got to go see it in the theater if you can with your wife.
Absolutely, we'll make it happen this weekend.
Yeah.
Well, this was super exciting, Jeetu, and can't wait when we publish this.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for having me, and I'm so happy to see all your success, Ashish.